Tonight, the Assembly has returned in a blur of numbers and pound signs as the Executive tries to get Northern Ireland back on a sound economic footing. As Economy Minister, part of Conor Murphy's challenge is tackling the brain drain.
We recognise that as a challenge, that we're essentially supplementing English universities.
Exactly.
Yes. So yeah, I'm absolutely up for the conversation with them as to how we do this. I know it's going to be complex and I know it's going to be difficult, but I think we can be imaginative and try and find ways to allow more people to access our universities.
We'll assess what policies are most likely to drive the economy here forward. And as the casement clock continues to tick, we'll ask who's on board with the project and where's the money coming from. Although Conor Murphy looks like he's hit the ground running, on Monday he set out a new economic vision for Northern Ireland. It's a huge department covering business, investment and higher and further education. When the Minister joined me in the studio earlier, I began by asking him how big a challenge he's facing as the new Executive finds its feet.
It is big because we've lost 2 years of a mandate. So effectively we're now operating on a 3-year mandate. So there are things I was discussing today, like with officials like employment law, that we want to bring to protections for workers. And that's a big piece of legislation. It takes some time. There are other policies in the department you might have went back out to consult on and redraw, but we effectively, that's why I brought forward an economic vision during the week, so that we can actually give a sense of strategic direction to the department and to invest in and other agencies. So it's a condensed time frame, and that's a challenge. It's a much bigger department, much broader range of topics that you have to deal with than in finance, though finance was challenging enough. But yeah, I mean, this is where we wanted to be, so I'm very happy to take on the challenge.
You've highlighted a number of key areas that you want to focus on during your time in office. The man you've appointed as your independent expert on productivity, Dr. David Jordan, says among the big contributing factors to low productivity here is the education system and the low attainment it produces. So how do you fix that? Because of course, it's not in your portfolio.
Well, some of it is in terms of further and higher education, training, skills, programmes that bring people who have sort of fallen away from the education system or the labour market. So some of those are there, although
schools aren't.
Yeah, but the finance to deal with those was actually European money, which has been lost to us and hasn't been replaced by the British government. So that's a challenge. I've had a conversation already with the Education Minister, Paul Givan, about the need for collaboration between our department and his in terms of meeting this challenge. He's up for that discussion, so I'm looking forward to the two departments to collaborate. There's hardly a single piece of work in the department, or probably any of the departments, that doesn't cross another department, and there is a real need. If this is going to be about delivery over the next 3 years, which we want it to be, there's a real need for departments and ministers and officials to collaborate together to get the best outcome.
And do you see a willingness as far as that collaboration is concerned, as far as ministers in the Executive are concerned?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, we had a discussion last week about childcare, and everyone was contributing. Everybody wants to have a role in relation to education, take the lead on that. But we all have ideas. We all recognise this as a priority for the Executive. We spent from last summer right through the autumn discussing, as parties that might be in the Executive, discussing a number of priorities, discussing the financial challenges and what we need to do about them. So there is a fair degree of cohesion in relation to all of that. Of course, we're different parties and we'll have different outlooks, and we'll have no doubt arguments in the time ahead. But thus far, I have to say I'm encouraged by the degree of collaboration there has been across the Executive table.
Yeah, but one of the issues that you don't agree on within education, of course, is the transfer test. Sinn Féin and the DUP take very different positions on that. Now, previous Sinn Féin education ministers frankly failed to solve that problem. It's now a department run by a DUP minister, and Paul Givan clearly sees things very differently from his Sinn Féin predecessors. If your economic strategy needs the buy-in of the whole Executive, how do you secure that?
Well, I mean, we can have different views on different issues, but in terms, I mean, the transfer test isn't a key element in terms of giving kids correct careers advice, opening up the pathways for them, making sure that our colleges, which are underutilised at the moment, are fully utilised, and part of that system of providing an education and plus training element to all of that. So there are an awful lot of things that we can do that we agree on. We're not going to agree on every single aspect, we accept that, but there are a lot of things that we can, and I have to say I am encouraged by the degree of sort of collective approach that we have seen to date, where we recognise that there are things, I mean, the Windsor framework issue divides us very badly. The post-Brexit. The Brexit experience divides us very badly. But there is a recognition that we need to pull together and try and make the best fist of things. Yeah. So we're going to continue to disagree on various issues. That doesn't stop us working together on some of the big important issues.
Well, David Jordan, your expert advisor on productivity, also points to the brain drain as a major problem here. MPs in the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee and representatives of our university say a big factor in that brain drain is the cap on university places here. Do you accept that?
Well, I accept that we would like to see more numbers in university. The question is, and it's a difficult issue, the question is how do we do that? I've had a conversation with Queen's yesterday. I've been speaking to UU as well, and we want to work in a practical way to try and increase the numbers they have. We also want to make access to universities accessible. So the idea of pushing up the cost to get into university actually acts in contrary to that there. So we have to be imaginative and clever about how we work through this and try and find ways to make our universities more accessible, to try and create the space for more young people and people returning to education who want to go to our universities. We have to make more use of our colleges, which don't have the same financial costs attached to attend them and can offer substantial courses to people. So I think it's not just a simple answer about fees or about costs in university. It's a measure of how we actually collaborate across the entire education system
you're talking about
to make a better outcome for people.
Yeah, but you've raised tuition fees there, and on that issue, you've already said that you've made your mind up and there won't be a change to tuition fees. But the universities actually want you to do that. I mean, are you prepared to have a conversation? Are you prepared to be persuaded?
I've had many conversations with them in relation to that. I happen to believe we want to try and get more access to universities, and I think if we put that beyond the reach of a lot of people. If you're talking to businesses out there and people who want to grow their businesses, people who want to come here, the big challenge we have is there are not enough people in the workforce with skills and education. If we make skills and education unattainable for people, we're actually acting contrary to our own economic interests.
I'm sorry, with the greatest respect, what the universities say is if you don't raise tuition fees, what happens is there's a cap on places here, so people who are qualified to go to university in Northern Ireland can't get a place. So what do? They go across the water where the tuition fees are higher anyway, and it's more expensive because they're not able to live at home.
And we recognise that as a challenge, that we're essentially supplementing English universities.
Exactly.
Yes. So yeah, I'm absolutely up for the conversation with them as to how we do this. I know it's going to be complex and I know it's going to be difficult, but I think we can be imaginative and try and find ways to allow more people to access our universities here.
Well, one of the ways of doing that, the universities say, is to raise the tuition fees, and that will allow them then to lift the cap.
And that's one of the ways they say doing that. There are other ways that I'm in discussion with them that we can try and improve the situation, and that's what I intend to do. OK,
the biggest economic driver, I suppose, within your remit is Invest NI. Are you confident, Minister, it is now in the right place after years of criticism, let's be honest, to help deliver on your key goals?
Well, I would have been one of the ones that criticised it prior to that. The report was very, very hard-hitting, very far-reaching, and Invest NI and the department have taken steps to make changes there.
You've got a new chief executive and a new chair.
A new chair, yes, and I've met both of them and I've had conversations with them, and I am very confident that they are in a process of significant change, that they recognise, as does the department, that there was a very significant need for Invest NI to change the way it did its business. The report argued for a strategic focus for Invest NI, and that's what I have provided on Monday in terms of the economic statement I made. And I'm working with them to the end. I am confident that there is a willingness there at that senior leadership level of Invest NI to recognise the position that the organisation was in and to work in a different fashion in the way forward. And I think in my conversations with the chair and the chief executive, that's the direction we're going. So there is an implementation plan there which is yet to be completed in terms of the broader change of it, and that is moving at pace, and I want to keep an eye to that to make sure that that is completed.
One thing voters and the general public might want to see in the weeks and months ahead is fiscal responsibility. What should be the limit, in your view, of the executive's contribution to the Casement Park redevelopment?
Well, I don't know what the final cost of it is, and I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware if other ministers are aware of that. It hasn't been mentioned at an executive meeting. But let's remind ourselves, there was a plan to build a multi-use stadium at the Long Kesh site. That then fell away, and the decision then was a three-legged plan, if you like, to do a regional stadium for rugby, for soccer and for Gaelic. I'm not sure that rugby made a contribution to Ravenhill. I think the IFA made a £4 million contribution to Windsor Park, and the GAA were making a £15 million contribution to Casement.
I suppose the question is, should it be an open cheque as far as the taxpayer is concerned?
Well, every single capital project which the executive have committed to that has been delayed has increased in cost. So this same issue is going to arise with every project, be that a road, a hospital or a school.
It's a very big increase potentially, isn't it? Because the original cost was 76 million. We're now hearing it could be well above 200 million.
Relatively, every single capital project has gone up in cost. Every year delay adds millions more pounds onto each capital project. So it's unfortunate that we ended up in a very long delay over planning in relation to Casement. That wasn't the fault of the GA. But what we have to do is, this was a commitment to 3 codes. And I believe that we have to follow through on that commitment. And there are opportunities, not just to secure money for the British government in relation to Euros, but there are huge opportunities that the Euros will bring. And there are huge opportunities that a developed stadium in Casement will bring, not just to the GAA and not just to West Belfast, but to the whole of Belfast and the whole of the North. And I think it'll be an economic catalyst. And we have to consider it in those terms. And this is an executive priority project. Casement Park is an executive priority project agreed by all of the parties to the executive and by both governments. And the contribution in that regard from Dublin is very welcome. The offer of contribution from London is very welcome. And let's see where we are with the project.
Are you worried about the change of language, or the apparent change of language on the part of the NIO? Because the Secretary of State in the past talked about how the money would be found. And then just a few days ago, he's talking about how maybe the money might not be found and it would need to be on a value for money basis and there isn't a blank cheque. Well,
that's a matter you're going to have to put to him. The Secretary of State,
what do you think of it?
Well, the Secretary of State changing the position is nothing new to us in these matters. But they made an offer in relation to Euros. So if they want the Euros to be played here, there's only one stadium available to do that, and that's Casement Park. I think the Euros coming here would be beneficial for everybody, soccer supporters, Gaelic supporters and sports supporters generally. I think it would be economically beneficial for us all. So I would hope that the British government hold to the commitment that they made.
And are you concerned that there's perhaps some kind of understanding, some quiet behind-the-scenes understanding between the UK government and the DUP on this issue? Because it does seem that DUP pronouncements on the subject have been at best lukewarm in recent days.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time they combined to do economic damage to this region, but I'm hoping that they've learned their lesson from the last 2 years and we're back in a space where we're being constructive, trying to move things forward on a positive basis.
Can I ask you about reform of the institutions? Earlier today you told Talkback on Radio Ulster your party's up for having a discussion about reform, so we don't have a situation where one party can collapse the institutions in future. Now the Taoiseach said in Belfast this week that should be agreed by the next election. Is that a realistic timetable? Would you commit publicly to that?
Yeah, but I think over the course of this mandate, of course, we can have that. There is a vehicle in the Assembly to do this, the Assembly and Executive Review Committee. It has been there for some time. We're more than happy, and we've said all along in terms of our commitment to discuss this, we've said this over the last number of years, that we were more than happy to get into a discussion on this. Any significant change of this, which this might be to the Good Friday, requires input and consultation from all parties and from both governments. So it's not simply a stroke of a pen exercise, but this requires, the vehicle for doing that is that review committee, which will then obviously bring propositions to the Assembly and work with both governments.
Would you commit to Sinn Féin not pulling the institutions down again? Would you do that publicly?
As I said on Talkback, we are there to stay. We want to do the business. We are there to stay in this executive. We argued for this executive.
So you won't pull it down?
We argued for this executive.
No, just be clear. You won't pull it down?
We have no intention of pulling it down.
I know you have no intention of, but you're saying that's different from saying you won't. I'm asking you, will you make a public commitment to not pulling it down?
Yes, I am saying we have no intention of pulling the executive down. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, Mark. The sky could fall in on top of us all.
Sinn Féin has made it clear it intends to attend the annual St Patrick's Day reception at the White House next month. What do you say to Saeed Shaath, the former head of the Palestine General Delegation to Ireland, who said the US administration is complicit in genocide and who called on his brothers and sisters in Sinn Féin not to entertain Joe Biden, as I believe this would reflect badly on the party and the people of Ireland?
Yeah. Well, there are many voices in Palestine and not all of them agree with each other. And that's been a difficulty in terms of unity in Palestine. There are many different factions. But the fact is that we speak very frequently and we have provided solidarity and support to the Palestinian cause for many, many decades when it wasn't, such a strong position in terms of
But going to the shindig in the White House is more important.
No, it's not a shindig in the White House. The fact is the entire week in Washington is a week of networking, of influence, of meeting people and of pressing.
You could do that without going into the White House, of course.
Primarily pressing the case for Ireland, as we have always done. But what we have said is, and we have done this in recent times, when Michelle O'Neill spoke to Secretary Blinken, she spoke to Jane Hartley, the ambassador to Britain, we have raised the issue of Palestine with them. We have a voice that can get into the White House Palestinians don't currently have a voice that can get into the White House, and we intend to use our voice for them there.
But you have said that you believe a genocide is taking place in Gaza. If you believe that, nonetheless, you are still saying that playing the Irish card, dealing with Irish affairs, is more important, and that's why you're going to meet Joe Biden in the Oval Office.
And we go and meet Rishi Sunak on the same basis, and he's equally culpable as the American administration. Nobody has suggested we should not go to Downing Street. Nobody has suggested we shouldn't go over to Whitehall and meet British government ministers who are supplying weapons and support and financial support to Israel in terms of the genocide that they're carrying out. We make our voice heard where it's important to make our voice heard, whether that's in Britain or whether that's in the United States. We have friends and we have influence in Capitol Hill, and we intend to use it primarily, as we've always done, in Ireland's interest, but we also intend to use it because we have a long-standing solidarity with Palestine.
Conor Murphy speaking to me earlier. Let's get some reaction to what the Minister had to say. Tina McKenzie is the Federation of Small Businesses UK Policy Chair, and Simon Hamilton is a former Chief Executive of Belfast Chamber and a former DUP Economy Minister. Welcome to both of you. Simon Hamilton, you were doing the job yourself 7 years ago. What do you make of what the new Minister has to say about tackling productivity and low attainment, first of all?
It is as the new Minister has recognised himself, it's a big, complex department. It's multifaceted. There's a lot of policy areas within the Department for the Economy that, levers that the Minister can pull that can obviously help to grow our economy. There are many that are outside not only his purview, but also that of the executive as well, with a lot of fiscal and monetary policy resting still in London. So there's only so much that any minister in the executive can do in terms of any issue, and productivity is probably one of those. And Northern Ireland has lagged behind the rest of the UK. The UK in turn has lagged behind the rest of Europe and lots of the Western world in terms of productivity.
Do you welcome the fact that he's made it a priority and it's one of the key things that he wants to tackle?
Yes, it's good that it is, because I think it has been probably an issue which we haven't addressed properly, haven't looked at seriously enough in the past. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's one of those issues which is probably politically not as sexy or as attractive as some other aspects of that portfolio. I think it's one that presents challenges in terms of its presentation. It's a sort of an oil tanker policy in terms of turning around the sort of low levels of productivity that we have is a very difficult long-term job, and therefore not easy to grasp a hold of in, as the Minister said, a 3-year mandate as it now is. And it's also an area which, once you start talking about it, it can conjure up concerns for people, because you're really talking about investing in automation and robotics and machinery, which can sound to some workers as if this might be the end of their jobs, when in reality it's that sort of investment that is going to ensure those companies, those jobs, employment, investment and growth remains into the future.
OK, sounds slightly like you're wishing you'd given it more attention whenever you were Minister all those years ago. But
it was well, I didn't have very long in post, as you recall at that time, but it is one of those issues which is, it is going to take lots of time to deal with, and it's one of those ones which I think it's good and right and proper that we make a start, but we need to recognise that it's not going to be solved very quickly either. OK, Tina McKenzie, you were in number 10 today, as it happens, and I think issues like growth and productivity were very much on the agenda.
Absolutely, because some of the problems we have them across the United Kingdom. I think our trouble is that we haven't had an executive, but equally we've got some of the worst statistics, and that comes down to us having such a high level of economic inactivity. And Simon's right, productivity is a complex thing, and we talked about it at length today on number 10. What can you actually do about it? Well, there's some real simple, easy things you can do to start, and Conor Murphy mentioned it there with the childcare provision, and he talks about education and third level education, but also further education, getting apprenticeships sorted out for people, and getting the hardest to help young people and some people that are coming out the other stages of their career, getting them into new careers.
So are you happy that he's trying to get to grip with it tonight?
Yeah, I am actually, and there's a few things he said there. He talked about collaboration. I think he understands that in order to achieve any of these things within his brief, he really needs to work closely with finance, infrastructure. He also actually needs to work really closely with the British government, because a lot of the things that are hurting businesses here in Northern Ireland are actually decided in Westminster. So, making sure that everyone's on the same page in Stormont actually helps them go with one voice, one ask to Westminster.
I want to ask you about the brain drain, because all of what we've been discussing leads on to the issue of the brain drain, something that the Minister's independent expert on productivity has highlighted. Do you think that means tuition fees have to be part of the conversation? We might need to look at raising them.
Look, I think there's a period here in Northern Ireland where we're in a very tricky situation. We know, for example, that if we had the Barnett formula that Wales now has, we'd be getting an extra 600 million a year. We also know that there's other people out there looking to help us and give us a window of opportunity. We also know that in the command paper, there's a lot of things inside there that can help Northern Ireland generate more money. So I think there's such a lot of things on the table. We've got to be really, before we go and say, OK, let's increase these tuition fees.
But the universities want tuition fees put up.
Yes, but to families in Northern Ireland, where we have some of the lowest income families, then we've got to just be careful about that, because I think that bringing, as Conor said, bringing more people to university is a good thing, and also bringing people out from areas where they haven't had opportunities. Yeah, but, it's going to give us more in the long run.
Simon Hammond, are we not actually making it more difficult for some young people to go to university? Because if they don't have the very best grades, they might not get into universities here in Northern Ireland because of the cap. That means if they want a university place, they have to go across the water. They've got to pay higher fees to do that. And as I said in the interview, they can't stay at home. And the cost for all of that comes back to the Northern Ireland government anyway.
Yeah, my eldest son is hoping to start university later this year, so may regret what I'm about to say and agree with you, and that I do think that we need to look at lifting tuition fees in Northern Ireland, not to the levels that they are in England, somewhere short of that. That still gives us, that recognises the issue that we have here in terms of lower incomes generally. But also gives us a bit of a competitive advantage as well.
Yeah, and that's what the universities say needs to be done.
And I think alongside that, though, the conditionality that is put around that with our universities is that they ensure that they do address access to university for people from more disadvantaged backgrounds, and that then allows the cap to be, if not completely lifted, but certainly to be raised. That allows more people to be educated here in Northern Ireland, okay, and to hopefully remain in Northern Ireland. And that will also help to increase not just university places at Queen's and Ulster and Belfast, but also in the Northwest in Londonderry, and help to address one of the other issues that the Minister mentioned in his speech on Monday, which was regional balance within the economy. Yeah. So I think it's a much more rounded issue. It does need to be, I mean, it's been something that has been sitting unaddressed again for a long period of time, but I think now is the time to grasp that nettle.
Right. Very, very quickly on this, if you would, but I'm interested to get your thoughts. When you were Economy Minister, Conor Murphy would have been one of those, by his own admission, criticising the performance of Invest NI. What do you make of his efforts to shift the focus and bring in new blood?
Well, I think he has been... I think he's actually been quite complimentary about Invest Northern Ireland and what he said in the interview this evening.
But he was a critic.
Also, he was, and you know, and nobody would say, not even myself, would say that Invest and I didn't warrant some criticism in the past. I think we have to recognise Invest Northern Ireland did an incredible job in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland at a scale that we hadn't seen before. And we've got a lot of companies that I'm not going to rehearse now that came here because of the efforts, the sterling work that had been put in by Invest Northern Ireland over a number of years. The economy has changed. And I think that was one of the things that the independent report recognised, that Invest and I had been doing a very good job in a particular space. The economy has changed. It needs to refocus, reorientate and do things differently. Okay. And I think the new leadership that is there, both at chief executive and at chairman level, has a huge amount of experience, and I think it is well equipped now with the vision that the Minister has set out to move in that direction that it needs to reorientate our economy much more generally.
OK, Tina McKenzie, that moves us on very neatly to another project which could attract investment into Northern Ireland, could offer tremendous commercial opportunities, and that is the redevelopment of the Casement Park Stadium on the edge of West Belfast. What do you make of that project and the way it is being played at the moment in the public square?
Well, it's interesting. I travelled back on the plane tonight with the DUP MP, and we sat for an hour, unfortunately, and had the conversation about Casement and about the opportunity of what the return on that investment could be. I also think there's probably other parties as well that are keen, just like the Irish government, to put some money into that. And remember, I'm the main sponsor of the Windsor Park, IFA, and we sponsor the women's team as well as the stadium.
This is your company, Staffline?
Yes, Staffline sponsors it. And so I think there's many opportunities for the GAA and sponsorship as well. And I've already been to see them to talk about it. I think if they can commercially drive a good deal as well, because this is a major thing that's going to happen in Northern Ireland.
Well,
and many companies...
What would that stadium, potentially £200+ million stadium for Belfast, what would that mean for the economy here?
Well, first of all, you've got to think about how many people are going to be working in that stadium. So one of the things I'd like to see the Minister do is to say that so much of that spend has to go to the SMEs that are here. And in one way I agree with you, Simon, on Invest in I, but equally we sometimes forget that 99% of the companies in Northern Ireland are SMEs, and they need the support from Invest in I, and I'm glad to see now that that focus is there. But equally, when we're spending big amounts of money like this, let's give it to the local businesses and let's ensure we're skilling people up, apprenticeships with welding, builders, joiners, all of that. We can upskill some of our young people. And in those areas across West Belfast, from the Shankill to the Falls, helping those young kids get the skills they need that they can take somewhere else.
Simon Hamilton, you were in government 10+ years ago when this project was originally costed at £76 million. It seems to have grown, the numbers seem to have grown considerably. Some people might say exponentially since then. But do you still see it from your new perspective as somebody who's involved in encouraging investment into this place? Do you see it as something precious?
I do. I'm a sports fan. I like all sports. So I want to see teams from this part of the world playing in, fantastic stadia. We didn't have that for many years now. We've started that with Ravenhill and with Windsor Park, and I want to see that at Casement Park as well. I think the Euros are a huge prize. They're a tournament on scale that the like of which we've never seen in this part of the world before. And whilst it's not about a couple of weeks of football in June or July in 4 years' time, it's about leaving a lasting legacy as well, giving that platform for people to excel in, not just in Gaelic games, but in other sports as well.
It does seem that there is a real possibility that we might miss out on that if we don't get our act together pretty quickly.
Well, I think if that is how it unfolds, and I hope it isn't, and I'm still hopeful that it won't pan out like that, that would be a terrible shame. I think we should be aspiring for better than what we have had in the past in terms of our sporting facilities, and we've started to turn that around. I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and I was staying in an area which 20 years ago when I had been in that city was an old abandoned naval yard. The city there spent $800 million in the early 2000s building a baseball stadium, and the rejuvenation and regeneration in the surrounding area in the last 20 years has been phenomenal. Now, we may not see it on that scale around Casement Park because it's a very residential area, but you can see how big venues like that in cities can really, really catalyse economic growth, can put a city on the map. That's what I think Casement, alongside Windsor and alongside Ravenhill, alongside a lot of other facilities, can do for this city, can do for this wider region. And I think it would be a real pity if an event like the Euros is coming to the UK, is coming to Ireland, and it doesn't happen in Belfast.
OK, just very quickly, you're not involved in party politics anymore, but I'm sure you haven't shed your unionist convictions entirely, commitments entirely. What is your message to the DUP, to the NIO and to the UK government as they talk about potentially the bill, the cost of this becoming too high?
Well, clearly, the sum of money involved has to be looked at. Nobody is clear on what the exact cost is, and that needs to be hollowed out. But this is a huge opportunity for Belfast, a huge opportunity for Northern Ireland, a huge opportunity for Belfast and Northern Ireland to be part of one of the biggest sporting occasions that there is, and to be alongside other parts of the UK and with Ireland as well. OK.
Look, there's an awful lot to talk about in Casement, and I just want to widen this conversation now and bring in John Laverty from the Belfast Telegraph and the Irish News sports reporter Cahir O'Kane. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Cahir, first of all, what do you make about some of the figures here? We're talking about potentially, one DUP MP in Westminster has said the cost for this could be £220 million. What's your assessment of the state of this project tonight?
Yeah, my understanding is that that's probably not a million miles off what the cost of this could be. Now, the cost has risen, as you say, since it was begun a few years ago, 77.5 million. It's probably going to come north of 200 million for sure. I don't see it being much north of that, but I would say that figure is not a million miles away.
And would it be worth it for the GAA and worth it for Northern Ireland and worth it for the island of Ireland if that was the cost and the project did go ahead?
Well, there's a lot of benefits to it. There's a lot of benefits around the Euros. I know there's been research done around the economic benefits around the Euros and that week itself. You're talking, you know, the upper estimate was around about 100 million as far as I understand. The lower estimate is probably more realistic. You're probably talking somewhere halfway of that for 1 week of football that would pay, you know, they're talking about the shortfall. You're looking at a shortfall on that cost of around £100 million. So you're talking about paying half of that in 1 week at the Euros, which, you know, is sort of a no-brainer when you put it in those terms. But obviously the British government are going to have to come with a big whack of money for it.
John, what do you make of some of those numbers and Cahir's argument for casement going ahead and the contribution it could make? Are you persuaded by the conversation we've been having tonight?
I've been persuaded that this has to happen, and it will happen. But I'm not sure it's going to happen in time for the Euros, actually.
So you think it might happen, but it won't happen in time for 2028. Now, if Northern Ireland doesn't have a stadium, it won't stand any chance, presumably, of playing in the Euro 28 finals because it won't be a host nation. Do you think everybody involved in Northern Ireland football has necessarily thought that through?
No, I don't think they have, actually. I think that...
Is that your understanding? That would be the case?
That is my understanding, yes. I mean, obviously, my hope is that Northern Ireland qualify for it on the football field, but if they don't, there is a chance that they could miss out completely on that, and that's not what we want. Yeah,
so the only chance that Northern Ireland football has of being a host nation and playing in those Euro finals is if it happens at Casement Park. That's the bottom line, is it?
Well, exactly. I mean, I believe that Casement Park will become de facto the national stadium here, replacing what was going to be the national stadium down at the Maze 15 years ago.
Now, some sports fans might be uncomfortable about that. Do you think they should be?
I don't think so, no. I think that... the stadium of Casement Park is going to widen out to lots of sports and lots of other activities over the next 10, 20 years.
Cahir, here's what's interesting. From what we understand, it seems the UK government is as down on this project privately as it is publicly. And yet, oddly, the GAA seems to be very relaxed. What is your sense of why that's the case?
There is a definite measure of confidence in the GAA, not overconfidence, but it comes from my understanding of, in writing from Chris Heaton-Harris, the GAA have a commitment from last year that it will be delivered. They're happy to work with funding partners and that it will be delivered in time for the Euros. The British government supported. Now, we've seen Jeffrey Donaldson's statement straight off the back of the Irish government pledging €50 million. The DUP pretty much ruling out the executive funding the shortfall. So you're looking at the UK Treasury to meet that demand. And the problem that the GAA has is the clock is ticking on this project.
Just to be absolutely clear, you talked about a commitment in writing. We know that Chris Heaton-Harris has said publicly, said to my colleague Mark Simpson on the 17th of May last year, as far as this project is concerned, we'll get the money, don't you worry. Now, his position seems to have shifted from that more recently, where he says it needs to be value for money and we might not have all of the money after all. Are you saying that there's a letter from Chris Heaton-Harris to the GAA?
Yeah, that's my understanding, that the GAA have a written commitment from last year that the project will be delivered. The change in language over the last couple of weeks, the feeling among GAA circles is it's related more to the procurement process and not handing contractors a blank cheque to say, here's a £300 million stadium, come and take all their money. So the change in language has been interpreted maybe in a different way, and I think that's where the confidence comes from. But the confidence is also, you know, it's not overconfidence because they realise the time is ticking away. If it's not developed and if it's not delivered for Euro 2028, I don't think casement will be delivered at all. And I think that's a very real sense as well. So the build time on the project is just over 2 years. They're expecting to have a contractor in place by the autumn this year. It is very, very tight. There's not much wiggle room.
Tina, you've already outlined your view of what the economic benefit would be from a new stadium at Casement Park. What would be the political fallout if the Secretary of State goes back on a written commitment to make sure that the project is delivered? I haven't seen the letter. I don't know about the letter, but Caher's telling me that such a letter, as far as he understands it, does exist. And certainly the Secretary of State is on the record saying, we'll get the money, don't you worry. If that doesn't happen, what are the implications?
Look, the Secretary of State has to be, especially, I mean, I'm sitting in London today listening to the challenges they're under with their budget. They have to be coming out and saying they want value for money. Who doesn't want value for money? They can't be writing a blank cheque. And they've got to say to the GAA and to others in the executive, you know, you can't have it all. But what I would say is that I haven't heard from anyone that's talked about this. I haven't heard anybody pulling back on it. And more importantly, casement is a very small thing in the scope of everything we're trying to do here as a team in the executive. And if they fall here on one issue and they've only just got up and running after 2 years and with everything we've got to do in this place, then it will be unforgivable. So they've got, and I don't think they will. I think they are going to do it. But the noises from the Secretary of State and other politicians are the noises you might expect them to hear, but it's politics.
Right.
They're going to do it.
Simon, what do you think? I mean, could this derail a fledgling executive? Is it that serious?
I don't think so. Obviously, I don't hope so. You know, I think that, you know, Tina's right that, you know, so much effort has been put in to after 2 years of the executive not being there to allow it to collapse on an issue like this. And I think that the Secretary of State and others within government in London will be very cognizant of that, having, you know, tried so hard to get things back and done so, that I think they'll be mindful of their responsibilities around this, and particularly in the context of having been so supportive of the project previously. And look, of course, you know, we've got to make sure that we do get value for money in this project, but it is a project that has much wider benefits than just merely building the stadium itself.
What do you make of the idea that that there could be a commitment in writing? Value for money is important, but some people would say what's more important than anything is the fact that this stadium is built. Clearly not everybody believes that, but a lot of people do.
Well, I think the Treasury will find the money. I think that there's already been a lot of commitment to it financially, and it would be very embarrassing for the government if they don't find it, and they will. But I don't think the money's the issue anymore. I think it's the timing is the issue.
OK, well, we will see. We've covered a lot of ground, and I suspect there's a lot of ground still to be covered. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in to join us tonight. That is it. For tonight, just before we go, a quick reminder about our latest Red Lines podcast, a wide-ranging discussion from the Senate chamber at Stormont. Is the media obsessed with casement? And is there a danger that the pace of work that's needed to catch up after a 2-year hiatus could lead to another RHI? I'm back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock here on BBC One. But for now, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good night from all of us. Bye-bye.